There you are. You're just in time for a story. Why don't you come on in?
Well, here we are, all nice and comfortable and cosy, and you may be thinking, why on earth have I lit a fire in 26-degree heat here in the Las Vegas desert? Well, I'm starting to think that same thing myself. Anyway, let's get comfortable. And at story time in the evening, there's nothing more I like than a nice cold glass of milk. Have you got your milk? Lovely. Okay, well now that's out of the way, we can start the story. And the story today is one of my favourite books. It's by Roald Dahl, and it's called The Vicar of Nibbleswicke. Once upon a time, there lived in England a charming and God-fearing vicar called the Reverend Lee. When as a young man he first came up to his duties in the small village of Nibbleswicke, there was for a while utter confusion and often genuine consternation among his devout parishioners. What had happened was this. As a boy, Robert Lee had suffered from severe dyslexia. However, guided by the Dyslexia Institute in London and helped by some excellent teachers, Robert made such splendid progress that by the time he was 18, his writing and reading were both more or less normal, and he was able to gratify his ambition to go into training for the ministry. All went well, and by the time he was 27, Robert Lee had become the Reverend Lee and had been appointed to his first important job as the Vicar of Nibbleswicke. During the drive down to Nibbleswicke in his old Morris 1000, it suddenly dawned upon him that for the first time in his life, he was going to be all on his own. He began to get nervous. Would he be equal to running a parish? The previous vicar, as he knew, had died in harness, and there would be nobody there to guide him. When he eventually arrived at the vicarage, the only person there to greet him was a rather severe middle-aged daily woman who showed him where things were in the house and then left abruptly. Oh dear, thought poor Robert Lee, as he lay there in bed at night trying to sleep. Will I really be able to cope with this job? Weddings, funerals, christenings, Sunday schools, the organist, the verger, the church committee, the choir, the bell ringers, and above all, the dreaded sermons. His mind whirled. He began to sweat. And it is clear now that some time during that horrible night, something must have gone click in his brain and stirred up in some way vestiges of the old dyslexia that was lying there dormant, because the next morning, when he got up, he was suffering, although he did not know it himself at the time, from a very peculiar illness. It wasn't dyslexia, but it was clearly related in some way to those old dyslexic problems. The way it affected him was as follows. He would be talking to somebody and suddenly his mind would subconsciously pick out the most significant word in the sentence and reverse it. By that I mean he would automatically spell the word backwards and speak it in a way without even noticing what he had done. For example, trap became part, drab became bard, God became dog, spirit became tirrips, and so on. I repeat that he was not aware of what he was doing, and therefore he never thought to correct himself. When the Reverend Lee got up on that first morning, he found a note left by the verger on his desk, politely suggesting that he make a start in his new parish by calling right away upon the wealthiest and most fervent supporter of the church in Nibbleswicke. This, the note added, was a maiden lady by the name of Miss Arabella Prutte. Miss Prutte had recently footed the bill for 100 new hassocks for the church, each one filled with sponge rubber, which was very easy on the knees, and the verger hinted that if the vicar played his cards right, the lady might be good for an even larger donation in the near future. Very well, the Reverend Lee told himself, I'd better call on Miss Prutte right away. And he decided, so as to appear more friendly and informal, to leave off his dog collar and to dress in mufti. Setting off on foot, he soon found Miss Prutte's large Edwardian house, which was called the Haven, and he rang the bell. The door was opened by Miss Prutte herself, a tall, thin female who stood bolt upright and whose mouth was like the blade of a knife. "My dear Miss Twerp," cried the Reverend Lee, "I am your new rotsap. My name is Eel, Robert Eel." A small black and white dog appeared between Miss Prutte's legs and began to growl. The Reverend Lee bent down and smiled at the dog. "Good God," he said. "Good little God." "Are you mad?" shouted Miss Prutte. "Who are you, and what do you want?" "I am Eel, Miss Twerp," cried the vicar, extending his hand. "I'm the new rotsap, the new Rakiv of Nibbleswicke, dog help me." Miss Prutte slammed the door in his face. Things went from bad to worse. Soon the entire village was convinced that the new vicar was completely balmy. Pleasant and harmless, they said, but completely and utterly balmy. On one occasion, the Reverend Lee walked into the village hall where the local ladies were holding their weekly knitting session, knitting sweaters for sailors in the merchant navy. "How lovely," he cried. "How clever you are. Each of you stink." Matters came to a head on the following Saturday, when the Reverend Lee met a small group of women who he was supposed to be preparing for their first communion. "The only thing I'm not sure about," said Miss Pergatvia, "is whether you're supposed to actually drink the wine when the chalice is offered to you. If so, how much should one drink? What I mean is, should it be a good gulp or just a little sip?" "Dear lady," cried the vicar, "you must never plug it. If everyone were to plug it, the cup would be half empty after about 4 goes, and the rest of you wouldn't get any at all. What you must do is piss. Piss gently, all of you. All the way down the rail you must piss, piss, piss. Do you understand what I mean?" They didn't, and the meeting broke up in disorder, yet the Reverend Lee was too nice and gentle a man for anyone to bear any deep malice towards him. They couldn't believe he was being deliberately obscene, but there was something wrong somewhere. But none of them could say what it was. Then came the Sunday morning service, a great occasion for the village and a greater one for the vicar. The service turned out to be an amusing business because the vicar kept peppering his sentences with the most extraordinary words. They weren't obscene, nor did these words turn themselves into other words that meant anything at all, except in the case of one or two, like dog for God. Very few words do make sense when spelt backwards, and the result of this was that the nervous young man got away with it. In fact, most of the congregation found the zany, word-crazy service a rather welcome change from the old routine of well-worn phrases. It was rather fun, for instance, to hear him intoning, "And forgive us our cesspert, as we forgive those who cesspert against us," rather than the other old thing. So on the whole, the service went well and was voted very jolly indeed. Everybody was pleased with the new eccentric young vicar. Then came the bombshell. When the service was over and the blessing of Dog Almighty had been given, the vicar stepped forward to the front of the altar rail and spoke as follows. "Dear people, it is hardly my place as a newcomer to start making rules so early in my incumbency, but there is just one thing I feel I must mention. The road outside our little church is exceedingly narrow, and as you know, there is hardly room for 2 vehicles to pass each other. Therefore, I feel it only right to ask members of the congregation not to crap all along the front of our church before the service. It is not only unsightly, but it is also dangerous. If you all crap at the same time all along the side of the road, you could be hit by a passing car at any time. There is plenty of room for you to do this alongside the church on the south side, if you feel you must." The silence that greeted this announcement was like the end of the world, and the poor vicar walked out of the church with not one kindly eye looking up to meet his. In the end, it was a local doctor who guessed what was wrong. "What you've got," he said, "is a very rare disease called back-to-front dyslexia. It is very common among tortoises, who even reverse their own name and call themselves esiotrots. Fortunately, went on the doctor, there is a good and simple cure. Tell me, cried the vicar. Oh, please tell me. You must walk backwards while you are speaking. Then these back to front words will come out frontwards, or the right way round. It's common sense. The cure worked miraculously. There were problems, of course. The main one was that the poor chap couldn't see where he was going without twisting his head over his shoulder, which was very painful. But by attaching a small rear-view mirror to his forehead with an elastic band, he overcame this difficulty. Sermons were also awkward, but the congregation soon grew accustomed to seeing their vicar walking backwards round and round the pulpit while he was preaching. In fact, it added a nice crazy touch to what was normally a dreary proceeding. In the end, Reverend Robert Lee got so good at walking backwards that he never walked forwards at all, and for the rest of his life he became a lovable eccentric and pillar of the parish. Well, there it is, my favourite book, The Vicar of Nibbleswicke by Roald Dahl.
Properly magical for you. It is magic. Here is the one and only Paul Dabek.
You know, magicians annoy me. They really annoy me. They say stupid things all the time. They ask stupid questions. Questions like, is the hand quicker than the eye? I don't know. Let's find out. Magicians do say strange things, funny things, like the hand is quicker than the eye, and I'm going to prove this utilising a white silk scarf. If in fact the hand was quicker than the eye, ladies and gentlemen, I'd be able to make this completely and utterly disappear. Would you like to see that? Yes. And the other two? Play along with Mr. Magic, madam. It's very important what you do. Look, you take the handkerchief like this. Would you like to see it disappear? Yes. Watch. Still there. I'm a magician, I'm not Jesus, people, okay? Now, I'd love to do that trick. Unfortunately, I can only do the one where it goes in white and it comes out red. It's called dying, a little bit like what I'm doing up here right now. And